Hello, welcome to the Turret of Pleasure here in the Enchanted Kingdom of Hermione. I'm your host, Zip Gun. Getting some pretty good response to my guides to various artists, where to start or not to start. Came up with a good one today. Talking to a kid, he was in his 20s, working in the music store, and he was in the department where they have all the modular synths. And we got talking modular synths, and he didn't really know what to make of the whole, modular synths doing something other than disco music, I suppose. And so I told him I said, you ever heard of Pere Ubu? And he's never heard of them. And I went, okay, where do you start with Pere Ubu? And again, it's like, again, where do you not start? Well, with Pere Ubu, there's a couple of hard and fast rules. Pere Ubu now, I think they're still kind of going. I know they were touring up until recently. The titular head of Pere Ubu, Mr. David Thomas, is the only surviving original member. And it really has been it's been David Thomas and a bunch of guys for quite a while now. And they're very arty. And it's good. I like it, but it's not the Pere Ubu that completely fires my soul the way the top flight Ubu did. Now, Pere Ubu is almost impossible to describe to a regular person. They are, very simply, a rock and roll band with an unusual singer and an unusual keyboard player. Guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, and singer. Pretty standard. They're from Cleveland, which is a great place to be from because that means you're not there anymore. And Cleveland really was the sort of asshole of the universe in the 70s. And it was just it's still a horrible place. But even then it was a horrible place for young people that were, dissolute youth. And like as always happens in these places, there was a bar that nobody went to, Drunken Sailors. That was about it. It was a real shithole. Like Thursday nights there'd be like 5 guys in it. So somebody in the local scene said, we could put on bands here. And the guy's like, I don't care. What the hell? If it brings 10 more people in, sure. And so was born this kind of weird scene. And these people were strange. And Pere Ubu was a band called Rocket from the Crypt or Rocket from the Tombs. I can never get this right. And there was a scene. Devo sort of came out of here. They came out of Akron. So a lot of real freaks. A lot of sort of deep thinkers, though. Sort of art students. And a guy named Dave Thomas, who then called himself Crocus Behemoth. That didn't last a long time. He was this great big guy with long curly hair. And he had a weird voice. He had a voice almost like he'd been inhaling helium sometimes. And he fronted a couple of different bands in those years that were all good rock bands. They were rockin' bands. But they were a little bit incoherent. There was a guy named Pete Loeffner who was sort of a journalist, and he's sort of a legend now because he drank himself to death for all intents and purposes before he really hit his stride. He was an early member of Pere Ubu, and Pere Ubu put out, when they formed as Pere Ubu, they put out a couple of singles, and each single had a slightly different lineup. Tim Wright was on bass. I think he went on to DNA. And by the end of, I think, about the third single, the lineup had sort of consolidated. Loeffner was not in. He was, I think, on the first single or second single. And then the sort of band solidified into a unit, which was David Thomas on lead vocals, Tom Herman on electric guitar, Tony Maimone on bass, Alan Ravenstein on synthesizer, and Scott Krause on drums. And Ravenstein also doubled on soprano sax, and I think he also dabbled on the odd keyboard here and there. But he literally was a synthesizer player. And I don't mean like Keith Emerson. Now, this is 1976, 77. He was a synthesist in the true sense of the word, the way that Morton Subotnick is a synthesist, and you know. And he created a thing where he simply provided texture and an ambience to the music that was happening. And it didn't often contribute any melody or rhythm to the music. It wasn't necessarily in any key, but it was essential to the music. And after their few singles, they signed a deal with an incredibly briefly existing label called Blank Records, which Mercury had set up to, for the punk scene. This is still pretty early, 78-ish. And Blank Records put out, I think, exactly 2 records. Pere Ubu, The Modern Dance, which is an absolute classic. And I think they put up the Suicide Commandos, which I don't think I've even heard. Anyway, Modern Dance is an absolute A-plus record. You can't, starting at that record, and literally with Pere Ubu, you can go chronologically and you can't beat it. Because 30 Seconds Over Tokyo was their first single. It's very famous thanks to, I think, Peter Murphy did it, made a hit out of it. And there's a lot of misunderstood. There's a song called Final Solution. No, it's not about Nazism. And so on. But this record on Blank, which of course came out, nobody bought it. It got deleted. Blank Records disappeared. We never heard of it. One of those weird label stories. Some guy at Mercury, hey, I got an idea. Let's form a sub-label and do punk bands. Sure, go ahead. How much do you need? I don't know. I can probably do it for $30,000. Hell, don't even phone me for that. And the next thing you know, you have Blank Records. And it's like, what are these Blank Records? They're not selling anything. Get rid of it. Okay. So this happens a lot in the major labels. Needless to say, almost instantly, Blank Records was a memory. But as Ford Pierce so aptly puts out, it was new wave mania. Anything that could be perceived as punk, new wave, or whatever was the hottest of commodities. And so none other than Chrysalis Records came out of the weeds and signed Pere Ubu in what many consider the classic quintet, if you will. Herman, Ravenstein, Thomas Maimone Krauss. And this quintet did 2 records for Chrysalis, both of which are excellent. Again, Dub Housing, first record I ever heard by this band. I bought it basically based on a lot of really good reviews. Everybody was saying how great it was, but they didn't really describe what it sounded like. I was like, okay. And I bought it A&B Sound in the import discount bin. I think it was $10. Took a chance on it, took it home, and I didn't get this record. I just went, this is weird. It's like some guy yip-yapping over top of a bunch of caterwauling and funny doodly synth sounds. And it didn't coalesce until one day I lived in a real little hovel. I had no heat, so I was chopping wood out in the snow, playing my records real loud. And after my initial kind of disappointment in the record, the only song I liked was I Will Wait. Kind of a rockin' song, kind of weird. And Blow Daddy-O I kind of liked. But that was about it. It didn't really connect with me. And then chopping wood in the snow, I put it on. It was in this section of my collection, kind of what I call the last resort. I'd listen to it one more time really carefully before I sold it. So there it is. It's there. I was really broke. I had no new records. That's what I used the last resort for. And I'm playing it away. And at the end of the first side, it got to Caligari's Mirror. And then it goes into the piece Thriller, which is essentially, I think, a Ravenstein thing. And it all made sense. I'm out in the snow, chopping wood. And then the song ends, the record ends. And the next record was kind of more of the same. They're song-like structures. The lyrics are telling odd stories sometimes. There's one on New Picnic Time, which was the follow-up to Dub Housing. Again, great place to start. If you find it, if you don't know about these guys, you find that for $5 somewhere, buy it. And give it a chance, Because it's, for me, anyways, these guys took forever to sink in. Once they did, they're there for life. They did, after New Picnic Time, and there's some live tapes of these guys. There's a version of Street Waves on one of their live records that is absolutely one of the great rock and roll performances. It's just, as far as art rock goes, nothing kills harder than this. And after New Picnic Time, they were not rock stars yet. How strange. And Tom Herman got discouraged and left the band. And he was replaced by, of all people, Mayo Thompson from the Red Crayola, who were a very culty Texas psychedelic band from the 60s who'd kind of come along out of obscurity and sort of tapped into the rough trade crowd of whom Pere Ubu was now signed because of the 2-album deal with Chrysalis. I'm not sure if, I think Dub Housing came out in the States, but New Picnic Time didn't even come out in the States. It's pointless. And so they signed with Rough Trade, which is probably a better home for them. And they did a record called The Art of Walking, which is pretty cool. It's not significantly different from the previous three, but you have Mayo Thompson, who's a much different guitar player. And it's a great record. Another, not the place to start, but again, if you happen to get that one first, it's good. It's a good record. It's an A. And then things kind of started to come a little unglued. Anton Fear joined the band. And I think Scott Krause quit for a while. And they became kind of the sort of artier band. They did Song of the Bailing Man, which was a good record, but it was a bit of a fall off. And then Thomas started to make solo records. And Ubu started to sound like Thomas, started to sound like Ubu. And ultimately, Ubu just kind of down tools. Thomas went on to a solo career that was interesting. Started pretty strong. Richard Thompson played on his first record, and a lot of the Ubuites, Ravenstein, stuck with him, which is very important because Ravenstein and Thomas are, in my opinion, inseparable. And as time progressed and Thomas advanced in his solo career, things got a little bit slighter. They didn't rock very hard. There's a lot of atmospherics. There's an amazing 12-inch single of just him giving vocal performances with a brief interlude by, what's his name, Ralph Carney, which is great. They got tiny. He did a record with Chris Cutler, which is just this almost, minimalist live performance thing. And so it got a little bit arty and a little bit kind of fey, but it was still very good. I really liked it. But it didn't move me the way original Ubu did. And then, wouldn't you know it, they decided to reform. But they didn't re-reform exactly. But they did put back together Pere Ubu. And Pere Ubu consisted at this point of Chris Cutler and Scott Krause on drums, which was pretty interesting. Ravenstein was in the fold. A guy named Jim Jones was a long-time stalwart of the Cleveland scene and a really good guitar player and a real team player. This guy was great for this band. Tony Maimone, David Thomas. And they signed with Enigma in the States and Phonogram signed. Here's a great trivia question. What do Pere Ubu and Nana Mouskouri have in common? They both made records for Fontana. And their first record was called The Tenement Year, and it was very good. And I saw them on this tour, and they were terrific live. Ravenstein did most of the gig with his eyes closed. The two drummers were very well meshed. Scott Krause played a very small kit. Chris Cutler had his usual ton of garbage with him. And really good band, really good tour, a total rebirth for them. And then they came out with a record that is, I don't know how to describe this. It's tied maybe for my favorite Pere Ubu record. It's called Cloudland. It's right here. I can grab it. I can grab it and show this to you. I think. Where the hell is it? There it is. Oh, for fuck's sake. Can I call you back? Back. The War Department. This record is their, I don't know, if you're going to introduce somebody to Pere Ubu, this is where you go. It is essentially a pop record. So much so that even though, now Pere Ubu was strange, they recorded every record from the get-go, it seems, at the same studio, with the same engineer, father-son team, and they did excellent work. Their records all sound really, really good. This record continues the tradition. However, the good folks at Fontana, isn't that just, them and Pere, they should have done a record together. And I think The Fall was on Fontana, too. Oh, boy, the mind reels. Parts of this record were produced by Stephen Hague. He of, I believe it's the Pet Shop Boys. Daniel Miller and Rico Conning. Daniel Miller from Mute. So, this record made a tiny concession, sort of, to commerciality. However, it is 100% Pere Ubu. And there are moments like, there's a song called, what's it called again? Flat, which is a pretty typical weird little Pere Ubu thing. You get a little Alan Revenstein kind of anti-solo. It's very, very interesting. They give you all the lyrics, great little booklet. This is one of the great commercial but weird records, I think, of all time, pretty much. An interesting quirk here is that every Pere Ubu song has writing credits that are collectively of the group. And the song Love, 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 which was the single off this record, it was tweezed by Rico Conning and, they did a sort of a disco remix. That one was written way back in the day of Peter Luffner and company. So, that one has the rather convoluted writing credit. All songs written by D. Thomas, A. Ravenstein, C. Cutler, T. Maimone, J. Jones, S. Krauss, except Love, 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 which was written by D. Thomas, S. Krauss, P. Luffner, T. Herman, D. Taylor, T. Wright, and arranged by T. Maimone, C. Cutler, J. Jones, A. Ravenstein with D. Thomas and S. Krauss. Not sure what that meant to the accountants, but I get the impression with these guys that they really, really, really wanted to give credit where credit was due, share the credit with everybody. Absolutely, this is a group affair. Pere Ubu, yeah, and they did a couple of records after this that were less good. Eric Drew Feldman, who's a great guy and who I actually did a tiny bit of long distance work with recently, which was delightful. I've never met the man. He was in Pere Ubu for a while, and I'd love to have a beer over, talk about his stint in this band with him over a beer someday. But the records, Ravenstein stayed in the band until just after this, and pretty much once he left, it all kind of changed, because Drew Feldman is a keyboardist. He's also a bass player. Played with Captain Beefheart in the Magic Band. This guy's got cred. And, it's just, but Thomas was more taking the band over by this point. And they did a couple more, I think they did one more record for Fontana, Worlds in Collision. I'm looking way across the room here. Then they signed with, of all things, Imago, which was RCA's punk label, new wave, alternative label. Imago signed some, I think Hugo Burnham from the King of Four was one of their A&R guys. So they signed, like the Rollins band, they signed Pere Ubu. And they actually played here in Victoria a 4-piece Ubu, which I did not see because it was part of a giant package starring the Tragically Hip. It was stupidly expensive, and I could hear it from my deck anyways, because it was outdoors in the town I lived in. And they put out a record that was, okay. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And then basically after that, it's all kind of much of a muchness. One by one, the original members dropped off. And I know Tom Herman came back for one record, but I heard it and it didn't do anything for me. I'd like to give it another chance. So my rule of thumb would be anything basically after this is not the place to start. Anywhere in the first, basically, anywhere in the first 4 records certainly is an excellent place to start. And the earlier you go, the better. There you have it. any young people that are going, oh, who's this synthesizer guy? Alan Ravenstein is one of the great synthesists in popular music. And he keeps saying he doesn't really know what he's doing. He's a very self-effacing fellow. There's a great video of him and the new guy who plays synths in Pere Ubu just getting together and improvising on a couple of their... He played an EML synth, which is a completely obscure synth that was used by like schools and things. Nobody else in music plays EML synths. So just in that alone, he's completely unique. But he is really, to me, the key of Ubu's sound. And without Alan Ravenstein, it's really a David Thomas record. Nothing wrong with David Thomas records because some of them are excellent. So if you think Ubu are a bit too noisy or maybe too rock and roll, not delicate and arty enough, maybe you should try some David Thomas records. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm trying to keep these relatively short. And we will talk to you anon. And look after each other. Don't forget to subscribe and like it, comment. I got millions of comments about my Zappa one. Thank you for those. Many thought-provoking ones. And sometimes those ones trigger these ones. So keep it coming. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.